Hello and welcome to the Oracle Advertising and CX Virtual Summit. Intelligence in marketing, real or, like my friend here, artificial. I'm Tom Bird, Senior Director for CX Strategy across EMEA. And in the next hour, we have a raft of practitioners and leading thinkers in the field who will walk us through their take on this challenging question. Let's go. First up, our keynote speaker, Mark Ritson, virtual marketing professor and columnist for Marketing Week. I both love and hate Mark. I love him because he's brilliant at cutting through the noise and distilling down the essentials that marketeers really need to understand. I hate him because he's more brilliant than me. Mark, kick us off.
Oh, hello. My name is Mark Ritson. How are you? Oracle have asked me to talk about artificial intelligence. And what I want to talk about in my session is artificial intelligence. The future of marketing is now. That's not really what I'm going to talk about. And all credit to Oracle picking me to talk about this topic, because they must know, I would imagine, that I'm not the world's biggest fan of artificial intelligence. I'm not against it, but I think there's an enormous amount of BS that's spouted about artificial intelligence. And also, to Oracle's credit, they've let me build whatever deck I want about this topic. And so I'm not going to talk about artificial intelligence, the future of marketing. Instead, I'm going to talk about something a little bit more basic. I'm going to talk about putting genuine intelligence back into marketing, one IQ point at a time. I don't want to avoid the artificial intelligence issue. I'll include it, but I'd like to broaden things out a little bit, if that's okay with you. So let's start at the beginning. What do we really mean by intelligence? Let's consult the dictionary. We really mean two very different things. If you look first of all at definition 2, intelligence means the collection of information, the actual stuff itself that we gather. And then if you move up to item 1, it's the ability to acquire and apply, keyword, apply that knowledge to a situation. So when we speak of marketing intelligence and intelligence in marketing, we really mean two linked things: gathering insight, information, and data, and then being able to make sense of it and apply it to our strategic advantage. So here's what I've learned about those two conjoined challenges on my journeys through marketing. 6 or 7 lessons that I think are each equally important. The first one is that intelligence is actually not the first step in the marketing journey. The first step in the marketing journey is actually the concept of market orientation. It's one of our most foundational concepts. We've been studying it in marketing for around about 35 years, and yet so many marketers have no clue what it means, and it has massive implications for them and everyone else. So what do we mean by market orientation? We mean the prime directive of marketing, which is the ability of an organization or a manager or marketer to see the world the way the customer sees it, which is our main function in marketing. One way to think about that is, there's a tendency for marketing to always be about us talking about that consumer out there. When we talk about market orientation, what we're saying is, let's not start with lots of discussions about a hypothetical customer. Yeah. Instead, let's do a 180. And let's actually look at how that individual sees us, looks at us, our product, our service, our company, because that's what market orientation means. And there's a few snags to that apparently very simple swivel. It turns out that you, with the greatest respect and love, while you're an expert, I'm sure, in the product and company you work for, you're actually an idiot of consumption. You're the least qualified person in the world to think about your product or service like a customer, because you're not. You don't have to pay for it, right? And when you look at your product, whatever it is, you see your work, your career, your salary, your pension, your future. You just don't see photocopiers or software or training or paper clips. Yeah, you are literally the idiot of consumption. And if you can embrace that through what I often call the humility of marketing and grasp the idea that how you see it is not how the customer sees it, you're in a good place to be a good marketer. So many marketers, unfortunately, never get that concept. They think they can really see it from their gut upwards. Another way, perhaps, to conceptualize this is when you signed your contract to join the company you joined a very good organization. But what HR didn't tell you is you left something behind. And what you left behind is the world of the consumer. You'll never see it the way the consumer sees it. And so you have to do what all good marketers do, which is let it go. Yeah? Understand you're not the consumer and let it go. And that's crucial when we talk about intelligence, because when it gets to marketing intelligence, it's not your ability to answer questions. Is this website good? Is this price right? Does the product work? The answer to all those questions, if you are market oriented, is the same, which is, I don't know, I'm not the consumer, but as a marketer, I can sure as hell find out. So therein lies the trick. First of all, before we even get to gathering data, is having the market orientation to be able to understand how to handle it when it comes in. I often think of market orientation very much as digging a hole, and then we fill it with data. But if you haven't dug the hole, then there's a problem. So market orientation first, then comes the intelligence bit. And even before we get to that intelligence bit, there's another point I would raise before we start pumping lots of data into the company. If you look at this concept of market orientation, which again, we've been studying and measuring in various different ways for decades, it's very intriguing what market orientation actually looks like. There are many different scales and models that have been built to measure how market oriented is an organization. My personal favorite is the Morton scale, which was developed by Rohit Deshpande and John Morton, who are among the most famous marketers on the planet, marketing professors. And their scale is remarkably simple, right? The scale looks essentially at 10 questions that we ask employees. And what we get from that is a gauge of the degree of market orientation within the company. Now, there's lots of questions. And by the way, this isn't one of those very basic, pop questionnaires. This is a scale that's been tested, by Farley and Deshpande across many different markets and industries. Anyway, it looks at many different items, 10 different items, some of which make more sense. For example, the first one there, the organizational objectives of this service provider are primarily driven by customer satisfaction. It makes sense that that would be one of the 10 questions that drives whether or not a company is truly market oriented or not. But there's a couple here that might surprise you. For example, there's one here that says the company freely communicates information about its successful customer experiences across all departments. There's another that says data on customer satisfaction are disseminated at all levels in this company on a regular basis. Those two questions are interesting because what they tell you is market orientation isn't just about having oceans of big data sloshing around an organization. Before we have that, we have to have the systems in place to spread that information in the optimal way. And I often think of that as irrigation. And what I mean by irrigation is, we dig the channels in a field before we pump the water in. And in the same way, in a good organization, a CMO, a senior marketer, ensures that the systems are in place to share the data before we begin to bring the data in. So, again, intelligence is as much about the channels that carry it around the organization as it is the intelligence itself. And then we get to the intelligence and what makes up that actual source of information. I think there's a huge bias, especially with a lot of technical companies, to believe that essentially intelligence is quantitative. It's big data. It's analytical. And there's kind of a cliche which plays out and we could use the recent Elton John biopic, Rocket Man, to illustrate it, where qualitative data is the flamboyant, creative, slightly indulgent sources of information that, frankly, they look impressive, but they're not. Whereas in this case, Elton John's manager is more serious and useful and applied and businesslike. And I just don't think that's actually fair. And in fact, I would argue not only is marketing intelligence at least half qualitative, it is first and foremost qualitative before the quantitative data kicks in. Let me explain. And let me explain with a silly but hopefully useful example. I'm now going to propose two different alternative ways that I'll run the rest of our presentation, okay? In alternative N, resten av presentationen är på svenska. Jag pratar på dålig svenska. De närmaste 10 minuter, bara min text och leverans. I'm going to do it all in Swedish, basically, okay? The rest of the presentation, all my examples, all my speaking, all my slides will be in svenska. I speak really bad Swedish, but I'll give it a go. That's option one. Option two is I'll do the thing in English, and my slides will be in English, but I'm going to invert all the slides upside down for the rest of this session, okay? And there are your two options. You've got option A, which is jag vill prata en svenska, or option B, I'll do it upside down. All right? So take a moment and think which one you'd vote for, A or B. I think almost all of you, probably more than 90%, will go for option B. Other than a small proportion up in Scandinavia, everyone else is going to go, give me B. Yeah? And that makes perfect sense. So I kick off the rest of my session with my slides completely inverted. And at some point, someone from Oracle quite correctly steps in and says, Mark, that's not appropriate. Your slides are upside down. And I say to the people from Oracle, chill out. I asked the whole of the marketing audience what they wanted. And almost 90%, a massive majority, requested that my slides now become inverted. I'm just giving the market what they want. Now, of course, this is a stupid example. I only gave you two options, and neither of them were particularly palatable. But that's what happens when you present a limited suite of options or variables and then measure the outcomes. Yeah, and this is a real problem. If you don't understand the qualities, the what, before you measure the amounts, the quantities are meaningless, as you see with my example. And it really is an issue. I spent about 4 or 5 years training McKinsey consultants, and McKinsey consultants love a conjoint. A conjoint or trade-off analysis, as many of you will know, is a brilliant method for assessing price and working out which attributes are most important. And on several occasions, they would share with me their best, most recent conjoint for a client. And sure enough, they'd measured 4 or 5 different things and how important they were. And I'd say to the client, oh, sorry, my slides are upside down. I promised. There we go. And I'd say to my McKinsey team, where did these options actually come from? Where did you get them from? And they said, well, it's pretty obvious. There's 4 or 5 things. And look at the measures and look what it's revealed. And of course, it was very easy to then say to them, yeah, but you've measured A, B, and C. But what if variables D, E, and F that you've missed out here are actually more important? They wouldn't show up on the conjoint. So you get the point. The lesson of marketing intelligence isn't just that you want qual and quant. You want qual first to work out what the options are, how they look, and then we can progress. Yeah. So intelligence is qualitative first. And if I can be even more prescriptive, in my journeys using research, I would tell you that not only should it be qualitative, the more qualitative, the better. And the ultimate source of qualitative intelligence is ethnography. Ethno, people, graphy, describe. It's a rather fancy word for a very simple approach. And the approach is get your ass out of the office, out of the research facility. Because if the purpose of research is for you to understand your customers, why are you bringing them to you into focus groups, into surveys? Why don't you go out to them and experience their world and become intelligent by seeing what they're going through? That was certainly the principle of one of the most famous corporate ethnographic groups of all time, PARC. Park were the research outfit for Xerox and were a legendary team of researchers who understood the power of qualitative first. This rather grainy photograph you see here is from a very famous case study in which the Park team set about trying to improve photocopiers. And that woman that you can't even see because the quality of the image is so bad, behind those two gentlemen struggling with the photocopier, is Lucy Suchman, one of the most famous corporate ethnographers of all time. So Suchman is actually hunched down in that corner under the coat hanger. And she did that for hundreds of hours, just watching and then talking to people trying to use photocopiers. And from that insight, that most qualitative intelligence, they were able to build better, more superior, more intuitive photocopiers. That's the power of qualitative research, particularly ethnography, intelligence that is inductive and comes from the source itself. Now, before we get too into the qualitative moment, let's be clear. There is a real problem with qualitative data. No matter how many days Lucy sits watching people use photocopiers or how many focus groups we do, the problem of qualitative research is it cannot be representative. Yeah? In order to get representative data, we need quant. And representation is important because if I can say these 100 people are representative of these 50 million people, I can now imply causality. I can explain things. I can then experiment and see what moves things more or less with magnitudes. I can test, I can prove. Qual helps me understand the problem and articulate the issues. Quant allows me to measure it with magnitudes. And so when it comes to marketing intelligence, as many marketing professors would tell you, we've always got the challenge of people who are chemists and violinists. Some of us intuitively prefer quantitative data. We're chemists by nature. Others, more intuitively, are perhaps violinists. We move towards more qualitative data. And the reality is, to be intelligent, to master intelligence in marketing, one must become a king or queen of both. And that means working on your weaker hand when it comes to research. And perhaps as we travel through the 21st century, we should add to the chemist and the violinist metaphor a third option, which is the supercomputer. Chemists, violinists, and machines. Because it is indeed time to accept that intelligence is also, within its limitations, also artificial. The opportunity that big data now presents to us is overstated at conferences, but by goodness, over time, it will surely come to fruition. The ability to understand analytical patterns is very exciting for marketers. And in particular, the idea that we can let the machine go fishing for patterns and insights and learnings, and then to test those learnings and to improve and alter things in real time opens a doorway to intelligence that's never been present before. The closest we've ever got, I would argue, is probably retailers. If you look at the last 30 years, retailers have become all-powerful, and it wasn't always the case. Why have retailers become the powerful part of the marketing equation? Well, partly it's because they have immediate access to big data. Through store cards and the ability to experiment in store, retailers have been at the front edge of big data. And as they've tested and learned and evolved, they've become far smarter and more intelligent than the manufacturers that supply them. Now multiply that by a billion times, and the power of artificial intelligence becomes apparent in driving marketing intelligence. But even once we've collected all that quantitative data, I'd also still recommend that you observe the fact that intelligence works best backwards. The hell do I mean by that? Well, this handsome fellow here is Alan Iverson. Iverson's one of the most famous marketing professors of all time. He's a delightful fellow, even though his photograph occasionally makes him look a little bit sinister. And Iverson has written a whole bunch of amazing works on marketing, but my favorite is one of his most simple. About 20 odd years ago, he wrote a paper called Backward Market Research, which changed my life and made me more intelligent, and I want it to make you more intelligent too. So what on earth is backward market research? Let me explain. Well, take yourself back to an experience I've had many times, and I'm sure you've had too. You're in a room inside your office with 4 or 5 colleagues. You're looking at some marketing intelligence, a quantitative survey that's been collected, and you're progressing through the slide deck of charts and data points and tables. And each time you come to a different slide, you look around the room and everyone thinks to themselves, well, what does this chart say? What does it tell us? Well, what it should be telling you is you're all a bit shit at this. And what I mean by that is you're doing it wrong. I mean, I'm as guilty of this as you are, but you're doing it wrong. And Iverson's backward market research is a fix for that process. Let me explain. So what normally happens in those suboptimal situations is we design a questionnaire, right? Often with hundreds of questions, yeah. We stuff it all in there. We then execute the questionnaire and it generates a shit ton of data. At that point, as we've just seen, we sit in a room and we try and work out, what does this data say? And we normally take a very tiny proportion of those slides and those data points and we build a presentation, which we then present at an annual meeting or a planning session or a review session. Yeah, this is the suboptimal story of most marketing intelligence. What Alan Iverson proposes is we completely change that sequence. We almost turn it on its head. He proposes we do things backwards instead. So first, we begin at the beginning by thinking about what are we doing this research for? We imagine the talk, the meeting, the planning session, the report we have to build or create, and we start at the end. We then design the presentation. Now, this seems odd, but I've done this many, many times and it works. I actually build a PowerPoint deck with titles and instructions for what will be in the slide, describing a table or a chart. The chart just doesn't exist yet, nor does the data to populate it. But this is the table that shows me X correlated with Y. And this is the title and the order it goes in. Having built that presentation, I then work out all the data I need to populate it. That then enables me backwards to build the questionnaire. Not questionnaire creating data, but here's the data I need. Now build a much tighter, cleaner, cheaper, faster questionnaire to generate the data that I need. And finally, I don't need to analyze it anymore because I've already got my sequence. I give the presentation or report that I'd already planned to give. Trust me, this process makes you look more intelligent, but also it speeds things up, it cuts back cost, it makes the process better. I'd also point out that intelligence on its own is weak unless we add the time variable. And intelligence multiplied by time should lead to evolution. I've seen it now throughout my career. I've worked for senior marketers all over the world, and a small proportion have a special skill. And that skill is they do what all the other marketers do, but with a twist. So they build a plan, like most marketers do. They execute the plan, again, like most marketers. They then review the plan. Not all marketers do that. They're quick to build a new plan. Good marketers review the plan in quite a lot of detail before they move on. And they do that because they want to learn. I know that sounds obvious, but most companies from year to year don't learn anything. They carry on as if what's just happened can't help them understand the future. The good marketers, the one that have risen to the top and been more successful, at least in my experience, take time to learn from successes and failures. And then they improve on the basis of that learning. And then, of course, with that learning and improvement achieved, they go back and plan again, but they plan better. Intelligence leads to evolution. It's an ongoing challenge. Yeah? Learning never ends, and marketing intelligence feeds that never-ending process in the best marketers. So, my argument to you is intelligence is actually several different things. Yeah? First of all, it's not the first step. It doesn't begin with intelligence. We must begin with market orientation and creating room and understanding of the role that intelligence plays. Linked to that, we've also got to create the irrigation in our organization so our intelligence can be spread around the organization, because marketing is too important just for the marketing department. Remember that intelligence is qual first, is understanding the problem in an inductive way, and then it's quant second, measuring it with elegance and magnitude. Remember that there is now an important role for artificial intelligence, but don't overstate it. It exists within the parameters of general marketing intelligence. And remember that of all the great lessons of market research, the best, I fear, is the one that Alan Iverson teaches us. And designing research, especially the quantitative stage back to front, can be very, very powerful. And finally, remember that intelligence is evolutionary. It should lead to you becoming better, smarter, more intelligent. Intelligence, therefore, isn't one thing. It's multidimensional, if you're smart enough to realize it. Thank you.
See, I told you he was good. Thanks, Mark. Let's change focus now. You know and I know that the world has changed. In fact, it's almost been the title of every presentation on customer experience for the last 9 months. But how has the world changed for the B2B marketeer, as many buyers are now stuck at home? And what now do those marketeers need to do differently? Well, let's hear from our very own marketing strategist, Andy Fisher, as he talks to Emma Sands, Head of Customer Engagement and Acquisition for Amadeus. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Great introduction. Thank you very much. And thank you to Emma for joining us today. So, we're looking forward to hearing about your insights, etc., and experience. Now, I'm sure the vast majority of people in this audience today know who Amadeus is, but just in case there are a few people that don't, perhaps, Emma, you can start by just giving them a quick overview of the business that you work in and your role within that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here, even if it is only virtual. So as you say, I'm sure many people know of Amadeus, but are maybe not too clear on what we do. So happy to oblige. So basically, we're a technology company. So one of the leading software companies in the world dedicated to the global travel industry. So we have a whole host of products and services which serve all of the key players in the travel ecosystem. And when I talk about travel ecosystem, I mean everyone from travel sellers, travel agents, through to airports, airlines, and covering hospitality and payments on the way. So the mission of the company is basically to power better journeys through travel tech. Yeah. Within Amadeus, I'm global head of customer engagement and acquisition. So I sit within the global marketing team and focus on engagement and acquisition of customers through digital channels. So my team specifically leads the execution of end-to-end demand gen campaigns covering the whole end-to-end journey. So we focus on activities across the whole funnel. Top of the funnel, anything related to paid media, search engine optimization. So we identify and drive relevant audiences to our ecosystem. Then we've got the middle of the funnel where we identify those audiences and recruit them to the relevant qualification and nurturing tracks, so that once the contacts are qualified as leads, we can then hand them over to sales as marketing qualified leads, so they can handle them through the bottom of the funnel. Besides all of the campaign side, which is the most exciting stuff, we're also the business owners of the back-end platforms. So a key part of that is to ensure that the data is being handled in the best possible way and flowing between all of the different systems that we've integrated into the digital ecosystem. So we've just recruited a new team member in that sense to take ownership of these data flows and keep enhancing the quality and richness of the customer data that we're gathering.
Excellent. Well, that's very interesting, a very interesting role, Emma. So as you said, you're responsible for demand gen. Amadeus as a tech company within the travel and transportation sort of industry and where it sits. Clearly, everybody's had a really tough time over the last 18 months, but particularly in your space. How has that really sort of impacted what you and your team have been having to do then in terms of, getting to reach out to these B2B audiences that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, that is such a valid point. It's been a really complicated time in the travel industry. And I mean, we've had to be very sensitive in our marketing content and strategies, how and where we're reaching out to our customers through this time. So basically, our customers' priorities and decision-making process has changed over the past year, and we've needed to take that into account in our marketing plans. But I think I'd highlight a couple of shifts that I consider as key that have happened during 2020, and we're seeing are still taking place over this time as well. So firstly, we rapidly adapted our content strategy. So in an extremely volatile environment with changes every day, government announcements, policy changes, everything happening all at once. So the different teams across Amadeus, from communication through to marketing, really had to think on their feet, right? So we played a lot more on our brand positioning and our thought leadership as one of the key industry players, that we could be there to reassure our audiences through these uncertain times. So at the beginning, we created a range of COVID-19 specific content in multiple formats within the first few weeks of the pandemic. So we tracked the customer engagement KPIs to make sure we were aligned with what our customers were looking for. Then towards the end of the year, we started communicating as well about a specific concept of safe travel. So across all of the industry stakeholders, using the most successful formats and tactics that we'd already seen working during the first phase. So that was a kind of the shift in our content strategy. Then the second shift I wanted to look at was really regarding the target audience and campaign objectives. So previously, we'd focused a lot on demand gen and filling the sales funnel. And we saw the need to shift towards more nurturing the relationship with our existing customers. So we took focus off the MQL generation and shifted direct response lead gen campaigns more towards those nurturing campaigns. So with the content that we crafted to appeal to this wider audience within the decision-making groups as well. There was a recent report, I think, from Forrester on the future of B2B marketing, which showed the fact that decision-making units not only expanded in size, so from an average of 4, we suddenly doubled that to 6, 7, 8 stakeholders making decisions, but also the seniority of the people making those buying decisions increased, because obviously investing in any new tech or keeping up to date on what is going on was more relevant to a wider group of personas than we'd originally been looking at. So we needed to take this into account, both to identify those audiences and craft our messages to them. So that's why I think the persona identification on our database has been a key, and is going to be even more important moving forward for all of our campaign strategies.
Very interesting, and it's interesting to see how you led it from a more empathetic approach, but in a more practical sense of what that meant from that, safe travel, etc. Very interesting. So the one bit I was going to add, and I'll ask on top of what you just said there, is, we've clearly got more decision makers involved, more risk averse organisations, etc. How did you cope with the challenge that a lot of these decision makers were, for the vast majority, even to this day, are still working from home? How did you manage that, and what impact did that have on your channel mix, for example?
It's a great question. I think basic digital channels already formed an important part of marketing strategy, right? So you don't care really where your customers are sat, whether they're in their car, whether in their office, whether they're at home, or where. The channels that we used there, the techniques we used, didn't really change that much. What's changed was more the weighting of those different avenues within that. So maybe the change I'd highlight more would be the shift away from paid channels, obviously, and much more of a focus on our organic search and our own channels within that mix. So I think there are 3 main areas which really gained importance over the past months in our marketing mix, and I see that prioritization being carried over as well as learnings for the rest of the years as well, even when we get back into this new normal we're all talking about, right? So the first one, I think, is the rise in importance of SEO. Before, we'd always kind of tagged it on as an afterthought. If we have time to do SEO, then we'll do it, but we want the more immediate short-term results. But we managed to get SEO onto our marketing plans and into the development roadmap. So we saw many more requests coming in through our internal systems to optimize content to help generate more organic traffic. So as the paid media dropped off, we really saw this user-triggered search turning into a priority last year. And I think it will, as I say, be a priority moving forward as well. The second practice we leverage more would be that use of more automated campaigns based on user triggers. So instead of pushing our content out, the typical newsletters and e-blasts, we'd wait for the customers to show signs of being ready to move along our content track. So that links back to that more sensitive way of bringing our messages to the audience, right? So we gradually are managing to move away, and it's an ongoing process, from that e-blast approach and more towards the strategic, always on, always relevant type campaigns based on user behavior. So this really is supported by that shifting content strategy I mentioned before. And we focus on the customer triggers, customer profiles to define the campaigns that make our messaging much more relevant and increase that engagement. So the final area, which I think is important to highlight, would be, and it's one of the key ones, which everyone will have seen, including this one, is the move from offline events to the online and virtual events. So internally, we've been leveraging virtual events as demand generation and engagement content, and seeing it more as a content strategy than an event strategy in that sense. So we see that events are now beginning to form part of that strategic content strategy. We've integrated our webinar platforms with our marketing database, so that now we've got webinar and event engagement forming part of that lead nurturing and lead scoring strategies moving forward. So again, just to summarize, I think it's the search engine optimization, the more automated campaigns, and that move towards the virtual events to form part of a lead nurturing strategy.
Excellent. Sounds a very thorough sort of approach in the way you adapt to the situation, Emma. So it's great. Now I'm just going to come back to the event that we're here. So I'm assuming that the audience have seen Mr. Ritson and his little spiel a little earlier on. But one of the points that Mark sort of brokered during his speech was he was talking about marketing intelligence, which is a bit of an oxymoron, one would say, for people who are not in marketing, isn't it? But what he was sort of saying is it's got to be used in sort of an appropriate context to have a sort of a positive impact. Given the sort of role that you've got on your team, feeding that sort of whole sales organization at Amadeus, how have you sort of applied sort of the intelligence assets and sort of capabilities, and how you sort of making that information flow, and what are you doing with it, and what's the sort of potential for the future?
No, again, that is a great question. I mean, I totally agree with Mark's statement as well. So a metric or a piece of data is just a number unless you've actually got some context behind it. So, I mean, that context can be a benchmark, an insight, or even specific progress towards a specific business goal, but it's got to have some context to make it actionable, right? So regarding data and how we're bringing that together, I think the biggest challenge any organization has today is operationalizing customer intelligence or implementing artificial intelligence. It's because that data is so dispersed across platforms, teams, and technology. So the key challenge is, first of all, identifying that data and then structuring it so that you can make sure that it's there in order to get the insights. And getting the insights can either be by human means initially, or as a next step by AI. And I think that's key, right? But there's a lot of housekeeping which needs doing before that full potential of AI and CI can be reached. So my team has been concentrating in this past year on doing this housekeeping. It's not glamorous, but it needs doing, right? So we've been focusing a lot on identifying the data sources, integrating those data sources, and prioritizing the gaps that we found, so that we can then build up a roadmap on how we can bring all of that data in, so we can prepare the way to start extracting the insights that we can now, and train future AI to help us leverage all of that data. So in the meantime, if we have opportunity to make quick wins, for instance, with send time optimization on email, matching audience via some of our integrations, or even running small chatbot pilots, then we're making sure to take advantage of this so that we can learn and then scale it out across the rest of the organization, because that's key as well. To scale something out, you have to make it scalable. So it's no use jumping through all the hoops that you can now to have a quick win regarding data if you can't then use that across the organization later, right? So, I mean, where do I see most potential for this at the moment? So I think there's a whole universe of AI still to be discovered. So it's first of all essential to keep an open mind on that level and keep an eye on what's happening out there. That being said, I think the opportunity AI will give us is not just to personalize, but to predict and individualize interactions. So it's going that step beyond the personalization that we currently can do on our tools, but it's identifying those best possible outcomes, the best next step for where organizations can find a lot of value. So I think was listening to a podcast the other day with Jim Lisinski, who literally wrote the ZMOT book from Google. So he put his finger on the value of AI to deliver this precision at scale, right? So creating that individualized, coherent user journey across all organization on multiple touch points. And I'm not just talking about marketing here, but also product development, administration, operations, everything, so that we can then identify, score, recruit prospects for the best possible nurture campaign with the best messaging. And that will enrich not just the user experience, which is key, as customer centric as we all like to be, but also it can prove the value that I think marketing can bring to the organization in the longer term as well.
You said there are sort of quick wins, etc., that can be delivered. Just for the audience here, are there any ones you could pull out of the hat that's specific to how the orchestration platform you've got from Oracle or anything else there has actually helped make that easier to do, more efficient, more effective?
Yeah.
Are there any tidbits you can share with us there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I mentioned before that we've started leveraging much more those possibilities that Eloquent can give us as a marketing automation tool. So previously, a lot of teams in the organization have been using Eloquent basically as an email tool to batch and blast newsletters to their audiences. So that may have some value, but it's very labor intensive and also very hard to prove the value in the short term, right? So what we've been doing is working on 3 fronts. You say leveraging quick wins, for instance, with the send time optimization capabilities that we have in Eloqua, we've seen a notable uptick in our open rates, and it's extremely simple to implement and then to prove the gains of that. Another thing we're doing is making sure that our user base in Eloqua is becoming more sophisticated. So it's no longer a matter of just executing an email blast, but we're giving them a clear operational framework, a governance and security group access, even based on expertise and the visibility that we have with the labeling possibilities within Eloqua. So we're making sure we're really building up that sophistication of the users themselves in Eloqua so that we can all learn from these best practices and we have the framework we need in order to scale them up, which again is important in a global organization. And finally, one of the key things that we're also using Eloqua to do is to improve the database health. So now we're really looking at leveraging the segmentation possibilities that we can have. We've just been skimming the surface until now. So looking at those automated behavioral triggers, the lead scoring possibilities, we're really doing the housework that we need to do in order to build that data model that we can actually use to serve the needs of the multiple marketing teams and sales platforms we have across the organization. As I say, not just for lead management, but also for preference and subscription management, where making sure we've got the KPI framework in place to measure the engagement with opt-ins versus non-opt-ins, etc. And just integrating, using all the possibilities we can to integrate third-party platforms. So we've had another quick win that we had at the beginning of this year was using the matched audiences with LinkedIn, for instance. So we really saw some great conversion happening there. As well, integrating the lead gen forms on LinkedIn, for instance, we could really optimize our campaigns based on key metrics that we needed to improve. But again, I think I'm still convinced that this journey is nowhere near the end. So we're still keeping our eyes open. I think we've got very exciting times ahead of us for AI and for marketing in general.
Brilliant. Emma, thank you so much. I found that fascinating. I'm sure the rest of the audience has as well. Thank you for your time. And there we go.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy.
Thanks, Andy and Emma. A full range of advice for the B2B marketer to consider there. Now, our final session for today, new loyalty. From transactional to behavioral to emotional. Loyalty is changing. Originally, we focused on the amount of value and transactions that we had. But with the digital age comes the option to include behavioral interactions. How do you make sure that loyalty connects to a deeper emotional level? And what role does customer intelligence, AI, and content play in this? Well, to answer these and other questions, I'm joined by a fantastic panel. We have Mark Ritson coming back from earlier, Jason Whiting, the VIP Program Director at Lego Group, and obviously my new best friend, and Alessandro Zanotti from Accenture, Managing Director of Accenture Interactive Europe for Retail and Fashion.
Great. So let's start with a simple one for Mark. Mark, the state of loyalty How is it changing? And is it more, or has it become less important in this environment that's changed over the last 18 months?
It's a great question, Tom. I think loyalty has always been one of the segments, strategies, approaches that good marketers have always depended upon. And I don't think that's really changed too much over the last decade or two. What has changed is the perception of loyalty among marketers. If you look at the 90s, I think it's fair to say we lost our shit a little bit and got carried away with loyalty and brand love and that very specious research report that never turned out to be true, which was, it's cheaper to target your existing customers than recruit new ones. I think we got carried away. The problem is marketers are a fickle bunch. So we sort of leveled it out again and saw, loyal customers as just another good, appropriate segment of the market. And then in the last 10 years, I think what we've seen is the influence of Ehrenberg Bass, which is gigantic. Don't underestimate it. And what they've done is partly good and partly bad, is they've said, look, we've got carried away with loyalty, but they've pushed the idea of sophisticated mass marketing and penetration so far that every Tom, Dick, and Harriet who works in marketing, whenever they're given the sort of loyalty option, goes, oh, no. I've heard from a very famous professor that you shouldn't target existing customers. You should go after everyone, and it's a bad idea. So I think loyalty has always been a massive opportunity. I think the way marketers have looked at it has either been overstated or now understated. And I think that's because we're a fickle bunch.
Thanks, Mark. We're on a seesaw, and it seems like we're going on one particular side and hopefully leveling it out. I want to, that's a perfect segue really to Jason. Jason, as you will know from the title of the session, runs the VIP program for Lego. I am a Lego fan. This all belongs to me and my son. But Jason, what does loyalty mean at Lego? How is it managed? And where are you on that customer intelligence journey and using the data to help you run that program?
Once again, yeah, that's a great question. So the VIP program, which is the Lego Group's loyalty program, it's been around for a lot of years, but we're actually looking at it a little bit deeper now, and how do we engage with not just our existing members and high frequency shoppers, but also those people that are buying for gifting occasions, and their frequency might be a little bit lower. So while we have a traditional loyalty program, we're actually looking at loyalty as the entire life cycle of a user and of a shopper, which are different for our products. So it's a lot about the brand and how do we bring more value to those moments of joy in a kid's life, right? So how do we have something beyond just that purchase moment, but then really make it that the family and the shopper really want to come back to us as a brand because we have more value beyond that. So it's about smiles and putting smiles on kids' faces. So when we look at how we're working through this today in the company, we obviously know it's more important than ever to have a direct relationship with our shoppers, and knowing how there's these massive changes in data and compliance and things like that. So we're really looking at how do we use the full ecosystem, every touch point, whether it's their shopping or they're browsing our site or they're interacting with our content. How do we really start understanding their needs more and more and more? And this really, how do we leverage this data? It really depends, right? So there's traditional research, there's first party data that we're collecting on that experience, but that's only showing part of that user's journey. A lot of it happens outside of our own website or even outside of our own stores. They're shopping in other places or they're watching content on other platforms. So we're really looking at this as how do we get first real research into our shoppers, understand, and our consumers, understand who they are, where their passions lie, why they like our brand, and really reinforcing that. But then on the intelligence side, then making sure things like CRM and in areas where we have lots of data in a data lake, we can maximize those touch points. So we're a little bit still working towards this. We've been around for a while, but we're fairly new into this area of how do we start leveraging more AI and machine learning to maximize some of the communication benefits. But we've always been very much around traditional research, understanding our shoppers, surveys, focus groups, market research, really knowing kind of the basics, making sure that we get that right.
Great, thanks, Jason. Alessandro, this is the setup, right? We've got Mark saying, we went too heavily into loyalty and we're trying to balance it back. We've got Jason in a globally recognized brand who are, to use his own words, on a path. They're on a journey. They obviously have started, but there's a long way for them to go to sort of exploit the opportunity. You are helping customers across Europe with this and closer to the cutting edge. So how are you helping customers from a data perspective on delivering either artificial or real intelligence?
Yeah, so there are two ways, in fact, to drive loyalty. The simple one used in the past is actually you give out discounts. You spend a huge amount of money on the customers and they stay with you. But there is another way that is more effective in the long term, not only financially, but is what we call experiential loyalty. So like you get a better experience for the customers. And in order to do that, I think you can only do that if you do two things. You need to be relevant and you need to be contextual in our view. That means that you need to use all of the data, as Jason said, from different sources. Actually, it can be internal sources, it can be third-party sites. And as Accenture, we're building data sources. We're doing data deals to enrich the data in order to know the customers better. We are sure actually that it will be a battle for data in the long run. If you get better data, you get a better loyalty and you get a better performance over time. The difficult thing will be to bundle all of the data around a 360 view of the customer in a data platform where everything sits, and then be able to get actions out of that. And this is where actually talent comes out, and where the data and AI technology helps, because there are so many data. So if you understand that, we cannot be human. You need talent to do that, but you need artificial intelligence to pull all the data in and to be contextual in a simple message with a simple discount or message or experience for that specific customer. So that will be the recipe of success for the future in our view.
Thanks, Alessandro. Let's open it up. If in the old world, you three would be sitting on a sofa or would be on chairs, or we might even be just leaning into mics. So let's do that now for a second. What do you want to ask each other? What question you got? I've got loads of other questions, but I'm just wondering if you've got any for each other.
I mean, I guess my opportunity to ask the guys is how is the reality of current marketing stacking up against the theory? There is a preponderance of data now, which I don't necessarily completely subscribe to, that says that your best route to success and growth is to go after everyone and not to be too obsessed with existing customers. Penetration, uber alles. I wonder how both of you accommodate that within your own approaches, because when I talk with most CMOs, they're either believers in the Church of Ehrenberg Bass or they're continuing with loyalty programs and a focus on their loyal customers. So how do you guys find it at the coalface at the moment? Because there's a lot of talk, but it'd be good to get your perspective.
Let's go to Jason.
Yeah, and you're spot on. I mean, from my standpoint, what we're doing is we're focusing on both ends. You get all the data at the bottom of the funnel and you can kind of just go back to that same well, but it's going to run dry, right? So you need to make sure that you're offering something at the front end. And at the top of the funnel, we make sure that we start that journey and nurture that to drive the loyalty. We can't just start with loyalty. And I feel like this is also part of the challenge, especially in our industry, for acquiring that data and trying to use AI to make the decisions for us is, we're a very cyclical industry, right? People are buying on occasions and gift giving and things like that. That is a lot of the toy industry. Kids, their views and their passions, they change like on a dime, right? So the data you have, you won't necessarily have all the data to make a decision on what that one child's going to be into. And if you don't know what they're doing outside of your own channels, then that's even worse. So think of somebody might buy a Star Wars set within our own channels, and we automatically start bucking them and as a Star Wars buyer. But lo and behold, outside of our channels, they're buying City and Friends and everything else. And that next best action might not be the right action for them, which is why we're trying to do more traditional research on our members, actually asking them zero-party data. What are you doing? What do you like? What's your interest outside of here? And making sure we're nurturing the new people coming in, and we're having offerings that can help lead them into that funnel. Once they're in, I absolutely agree. Like at the bottom of the funnel, maximize the communication timing, make sure you get that right, the next best action. But it's not as easy as just saying, oh, we have a load of data and we can automatically predict that. It's going to vary depending on the user.
Alessandro, what's your take on Mark's question?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think I'm working a lot on I would say how to organize for be successful with data, and because I think that a lot of companies are back to reality. Actually, they're still very fragmented from an org standpoint, and this is one of the things actually that prevent the use and the bundling of the data. So I see, as an example, actually, I see many companies that are structured with one team that is taking care of the acquisition, and one team that is taking care of the loyalty, or one team is care of retail, digital channels, social media channels. So from an org standpoint, actually, like a data transformation and to drive loyalty, actually requires actually to work in a more coordinated way, and you need to reshape actually the governance actually of the power around of data. So I guess what we see as a trend, back to your question, Mark, is actually a revamping actually of loyalty. Also because on the other side, I work in retail business, and a lot of companies are realizing that they need to monetize the customer base differently. So if they reach the data, then they're not selling in reality the data on the customer, but they're doing two things actually. A lot of players are playing as a media company. So we're launching divisions actually to monetize the traffic they have on the site, retailers. And at the same time, a lot of companies are launching what is called a marketplace strategy, where actually they monetize the customer base by not only by selling their goods, but by upselling goods from others as well, becoming a merchant, let's say like Amazon behave. So two things that they all require actually the ability to work on third-party data to get the customer loyal, also because the value per customer is really the focus today, especially in this COVID period where the rules of loyalty are slightly changes, and several customers took the chance to try different sites online, offline, and so it's really a battle for loyalty is now actually back. Here we are.
So Mark, you've opened a huge can of worms there. There's a little thread, a new thread, apart from the marketplace. There's a new thread I want to ask you about, which was borne out in those last answers, which is content. Content created by brands and content created by consumers. How important is that, and how does that play in the loyalty game, and how are you leveraging it or struggling with it? Mark, I'd like to go to you first.
Yeah, I think it is a key question. I mean, there's a couple of plays here, right? So one is just allowing the content between brand loyal consumers to kind of to spark into life. And there's nothing more beautiful than when two loyalists wax lyrical about your brand while you effectively are doing nothing, and ideally while other people are watching. So there is a beautiful, far from the periphery of traditional didactic communications moment where properly organic content between properly loyal customers does indeed take place. My own bias towards loyalty is one that we rarely talk about, which isn't actually immediately fiscal at all. For me, the first place whenever I've done big jobs on brand revitalization or brand strategy is to recruit loyalists and find out why they love the brand. It's a deliberately unrepresentative sample, but I've always found that they carry within them lots of insights that we can then take and potentially spread out to the rest of the market. So yeah, content between loyalists, great. but also the content in the form of the intelligence I can take. There is no greater insight, in my opinion, in the universe of brand data and brand intelligence than loyalists explaining why they're loyal to a brand. It's the purest of the pure insight when it comes to understanding why a brand is, what makes a brand special. So yeah, in that sense, I do think, other than just we can make money from loyalists and it's easier and cheaper, their insights and their content that we can take from them in the form of intelligence is one of the most precious assets. And again, the problem is marketers are being trained to always look for representative scientific samples, which definitely has its place, but the unrepresentative outlier, massively loyal. I mean, we all have, every brand has customers who are completely mental about a brand, right? They're a small group, but in that group, there is enormous insight for the mainstream. And I think we often miss that point.
There are obsessives when it comes to Lego. How do the obsessives and how does content, either user generated or from the incredible brand that is Lego, that's giving us so much content, how does that work, Jason? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I hate to use the term obsessive, but they're just very big fans, and a lot of the people in the organization are huge fans, and they create massive amounts of content, and it's something we really lean into and try to support as much as we can. These fans, even seen by like the success of Lego Masters, shows that there's a desire for people that even aren't these diehard fans to see this content and be inspired by it. So it's something that's really important to us, and we really lean into it because Mark's 100% right. Like fans talking to fans are going to be your biggest advocates, and the real multiplying power here is the fact that not only are they talking to themselves, but they're inspiring others. They're talking to others, and it's something we see. Within our own program, we see those people who have the highest propensity to give Lego products as gifts tend to be the fans that are they love the brand themselves, they love the product themselves, and they want to share that with others. That's a loyalty it's inherent in that culture that's not necessarily driven by us as a group, but we definitely want to support it because these are our loyalists.
Thank you, Jason. Alessandro, you spoke about the channels being separate and trying to coordinate them together, and one of them you were talking about social media. That's probably that's a traditional channel for content creation, if I can use social media and traditional in the same sentence. How are brands best leveraging that content and working out what content to use, and then how are they leveraging the UGC, the user-generated content, effectively?
Yep. So it's a very good question. Like there are a couple of things that I would like to touch. So what I see in the market is that most of the clients are getting organized for content, let's say. So content was left a lot to third-party agencies, to other players, and to the local markets. If I look at the top players I'm working with, they're all getting organized to get coordination at regional or global level on the content. And I have to admit, many of them with us, some of them are building content factories. So that's a business we're investing a lot in to produce, because they realized actually that produce the best content and relevant content for the different audiences is key to drive up loyalty, but also to drive up other factors like the open rate for mails or the outcome of an advertising campaign actually online. So content is key not only to convey your brand image, but also to improve your digital performance and improve the loyalty. Because if you want to be really, really contextual, you need to play with the right content to the right audience. And that's not a simple thing. So the ability to produce, I would say, the content in different options, like the background, the coloring of the people, the style of the things, I think is more and more important actually to be really personal. with the different audiences. And this, the other trend I wanted to tell about is actually in order to optimize the cost of producing a huge amount of content, because it's exploding actually the amount of digital content that is produced, is to do two things. The first thing is to think already cross-channel. So the best practices are actually producing content upfront that can be leveraged in the different, I would say, media and touch points actually, but with a single production at the very beginning that is able to cover all of them. And the second thing is actually a lot of companies are working on a technology called CGI. That is actually, so like the content is digital since the very beginning actually. So like we're working with fashion players where actually the model is an avatar, is a virtual model. Actually, and the clothes as well and the accessories actually, you don't go through photo shooting, you design actually with CAD, and then actually everything flows directly in digital to the advertising. And that's a very good way through CGI technology actually, not only to show high quality of the content, videos and images, but also actually to cut off on the cost as well, because you don't go to physical with like a sampling and a collection. You go photo shooting and then you send it around, but everything is digital upfront and it's still digital actually when it is marketed actually. Quality content can drive up to 30% actually the open and a conversion rate for a campaign. So like it's incredible the amount of business that you can find through optimizing the content for the specific moments in time and audiences, in fact. Yeah, so thank you.
Great, thank you. And we're come to the end of our session. I hope you're loyal to come back. I think we've been on a bit of a journey, haven't we? We've been on we're all sitting over on one side, just mining away at the same customers, and Mark said that was dangerous, and we all, I think, agree that that's dangerous. We've got to spread, but we probably don't want to just be targeting everybody with everything. We then went through Jason's journey of where he is now, in the thick of running the VIP program for Lego, but considering the wider business and taking them on their journey of how they're starting to use more and more insight, both traditional and data-driven through behavioral, of what they should be doing next for their customer. And then we got to Alessandro and he gave us some examples, some real-world examples today of brands that are exploiting AI to increase performance of campaigns. I think what my sort of final take on it, and the thread that I have heard through all, is that it's still the experience. We've moved from this transactional world of loyalty. We're now somewhere between the behavioral and the emotional step, and where there's lots of things we can do to keep those customers coming back and back. So thank you for your time, gentlemen, and I hope you join us again for another session.
So there we are. An hour has passed. We've been enlightened by Mark. He's made the complex understandable. And Emma and Andy have helped us travel to the world of B2B marketing, providing much tactical and strategic insight. And we've ended discussing loyalty with our eminent panel. If you missed anything or you want to share it with others, don't panic. All will be available on demand very, very soon. I look forward to seeing you all on our next summit. That's all from me, Tom Bird. Goodbye.